Welcome to Navigating Special Education. I am Karen Price, Director of Family Support here at the Vermont Family Network, and I am here with my co-presenter,
Christine Kilpatrick. I'm a family support consultant here at Vermont Family Network. Karen and I are both parents of children or young adults with special needs.
And both of us have been at VFN and formerly VPIC for over 14 years.
Yeah. Old timers.
Yeah. I'm just starting off with a quote from a psychologist that reminds us that children want to succeed. We hope you will learn more about special education and be a better advocate. An effective advocate is knowledgeable, organized, and communicates clearly. VFN has a canned notebook format for organization. There are also other organization tools on various disability websites. Keep your paperwork together and remember, always put everything in writing. I'll start with some general education initiatives that you might all be familiar with. MTSS, Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, the Common Core State Standards, Vermont's Early Learning Standards, and proficiency-based graduation requirements. But there's more. Personalized learning plans, flexible pathways, dual enrollment, work-based learning, and PBIS. We will not be covering any of these in detail, but they all touch upon special education. Special education starts with IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is the federal law that ensures services to children with disabilities. More than 6.5 million children in this country are served under IDEA. There are parts to IDEA. Part C, you might hear that from time to time, that part of IDEA serves infants and toddlers. The IDEA Part B serves children and youth from the ages of 3 to 21. IDEA as a federal law prevails over state and local rules and regulations. Other pertinent federal laws that you should know about include FERPA, which protects the privacy of student education records. Also, Section 504, which is an anti-discrimination civil rights statute that requires the needs of children with disabilities to be met as adequately as the needs of the non-disabled students are met. Section 504 has different eligibility requirements, processes, and procedures than special education. Children on IEPs are also protected under Section 504. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life. It has 5 titles or sections. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act requires state vocational rehabilitation agencies to provide pre-employment transition services to all youth with disabilities to assist them in transitioning to post-secondary education and competitive integrated employment. The 6 principles of IDEA. So these are FAPE, or Free Appropriate Public Education, Least Restrictive Environment, Evaluation at Public Expense, parent and student participation in decision-making, the Individualized Education Program, or the IEP, and procedural safeguards, which are also known as parents' rights. FAPE ensures that eligible children with disabilities have available to them special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living in a cost-effective manner, and that the rights of children with disabilities and their parents are protected. You may see child find notices in your local paper. States are required to carry out activities to find and evaluate children with special needs.
Okay, it's my turn. This is Christine. I'll try not to make too much noise with my rattly papers. So you can see in this graphic, we're going to talk about the evaluation process. We actually have a whole lot of slides about that, so I might go a little bit quickly through them. But if you have a question at any point about any of this, please feel free to go ahead and type it in the question box. So you can see parents are supposed to be involved in all steps of the process. That's extremely important because you know your child best. The purpose of the evaluation is really these points that you see below. You want to make sure that it's going to identify children who have disabilities or delays, and they might need special education and related services. It will determine whether a child is a child with a disability under the Individuals with Disability Education Act specifically. Planning an individualized education program, or an IEP, it provides information that will help parents and school professionals develop an appropriate IEP for the child. And it also might help measure progress. Referral for evaluation, you might have concerns about the child's educational or functional or developmental skills. Developmental skills is specifically for younger children, the 3 to 5-year-olds. And it's best to do the request in writing for special education. Otherwise, you know, everyone's busy, things can get lost. Verbal request is okay, but it's always good to follow it up with an email or a letter. You should receive written notification of the school's proposal or refusal to evaluate within 15 calendar days. A quick note about that, I won't get into too much detail, but recently there has been kind of a mix-up with the Agency of Education in Vermont's rules and the rules that they've been implementing for the past 4 years. They discovered they had, I believe, perhaps filed the wrong copy. I'm not 100% sure, and I won't speak to exactly what happened, but the result of that is to remember that the 15 calendar days for response is considered a best practice. So there is still an expectation that special ed directors or districts will be getting back to families within 15 calendar days. But unfortunately, at this point anyway, that is no longer in rule. Evaluation planning. So this is an extremely important part of the process. And I think unfortunately for a lot of families, it can be very overwhelming. So to remember to just take it slow, take some time before the meeting and really try to think about what you want to bring to the table. The EPT consists of parent, educational team members, and other individuals. So you'll have a mix of folks there. We suggest for families, and we're happy to help you with this, to prepare a list of concerns and questions that you'd like answered through the testing. It's good to bring that in a list because, as we've all experienced, when you get around the table, sometimes it can be hard to remember all the concerns that you had. So as you think of them during the week, when you know your meeting's coming up, just jot them down. The evaluation and planning team will develop an actual written evaluation plan, which consists of that series of questions that you developed, and the questions from the professionals at the school. And you will be asked to sign consent before they can start any testing. So there's no opportunity for them to suddenly test your child without you knowing, because you have to actually sign and give them permission. One suggestion that we have for families is perhaps before you sign the consent for evaluation, you might want to go ahead and just make sure you have a finalized copy of the plan to ensure that you're in agreement with the questions and that your concerns are represented. There's all different types of evaluations, but so initial evaluation is only for children who aren't already in special education. Sometimes that's confusing because your child, perhaps they had other evaluations in their lives through the school, but they weren't found eligible. Even if that's the case, this is still considered an initial evaluation if your child's not in special ed. A reevaluation should occur at least every 3 years, unless new information is needed more frequently. The comprehensive evaluation should include a variety of tools and really look at a wide scope of areas where you might have concerns. This is just something to be aware of. Sometimes it's confusing for families to understand the difference between a screening and evaluation. A screening of a child by a teacher is not considered to be a complete evaluation. Screening can happen for any kid in regular ed who perhaps a teacher has a concern about. But it doesn't, that in and of itself does not mean that your child has had a comprehensive evaluation. It's just one tool. The timelines for evaluation, it should be completed within 60 calendar days, and reevaluations should be completed by that 3-year review date. They should be individually selected and administered to determine the existence of a disability and the effects the disability has on your child's performance. So what is the issue and how is that impacting your child? So this is just a little bit about the different types of testing that can be done as part of an evaluation. And here are the areas that can be looked at, including health, hearing and vision, social, emotional, behavioral, and general intelligence. Communication status, so you can see it's a comprehensive list. Motor skills, developmental performance for the littler children, and you can also think about daily living skills, vocational needs, and assistive technology if that's appropriate. So if you've not heard that term before, assistive technology, it's sometimes referred to as AT, and here are the definitions of assistive technology. So it's any item or a piece of equipment, and I won't read the whole definition to you, but it's really meant to help improve the functional capabilities of a child. And it includes a device or a service. It could mean somebody helping with something your child needs to do at school. So assistive technology evaluation, providing equipment, maintaining, customizing, replacing, coordinating with other therapies with AT, training and technical assistance for children, families, and staff. So one example might be if you discover that your child has a print disability such as dyslexia, there could be an assistive technology that could help by doing speech to text or reading aloud to your child so that they can still access the curriculum. A little bit about behavior regarding evaluation. So if you have a child and your child's behavior is really getting in the way of he or she learning, this is something that really needs to be addressed by the team. And they should really be talking about concrete strategies and supports to help alleviate that behavior. It should really be a positive focus, so a positive behavioral intervention plan based on data should be included. And one assessment that could be done is something called a functional behavioral assessment, or an FBA. And that's really an observation over time or in several environments to see what's not working for your child and make some decisions about how could we change the environment, how could we help support them in a positive way. We wanted to just include this information about medication because this is a question that sometimes comes up where we will have a parent call and they're feeling stressed that it feels like the school may be insisting that their child be medicated. And, you know, there are certain disabilities that with medication they might be helped, but it's important for you to know as a parent that if that's not working for your family or if that's not something your family wants to engage in, you cannot be forced to medicate your child as a condition of your child attending school or receiving an evaluation or receiving services. And that's a rule that comes out of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. When the evaluation is complete at the end of that 60 days, there will be an eligibility meeting where they're going to talk about whether or not your child is eligible for special education. You can request a copy of the evaluation reports before the meeting so you have an opportunity to take a look at them and understand what's in them. If you get those reports, and very often they're difficult to read, it's okay to ask a lot of questions and gather more information. You can let your team know if you feel like you need more time to digest and think about the information once it's explained to you. You don't have to immediately sign in your eligibility meeting that you agree or disagree with the evaluation. It's okay to take time and think about it. So the eligibility determination process is the 3 gates. And honestly, this could be a whole webinar onto itself, so we won't get into too much detail here. If you have questions about this process, feel free to give us a call and we are happy to talk with you about it, but we'll go over it generally. So the 3 gates in Vermont are that the child has a disability, that disability has an adverse effect on their learning, and there's a need for specialized instruction. Here, we're going to show you a list of all the disability categories. I won't read them all, but this is what they are in general. This will be part of the slides, so if you want to go back and look at them later, you're welcome to. Adverse effect is described as the lowest 15th percentile in a basic skill area, and it's reflected by performance on at least 3 of 6 measures over a period of time. And again, I know that's complicated information, so if you have questions, feel free to give us a call. We also have a fact sheet that walks you through this. Specialized instruction is specially designed instruction that can't be provided within the school's standard instructional conditions. So in other words, it can't be provided the same way it's provided to all the other students in school. If you disagree with the evaluation, so say you take your time and you think about it and then you think, you know, there are things in here that I just don't feel right about, it doesn't look right to me, you have a right to disagree with the evaluation provided by the school. And you can ask for something called an independent evaluation at no cost to you. It makes sure that you make a request for an independent evaluation in writing, just like you did for the initial evaluation. Reevaluations, so once your child's in special education and that every 3 years minimally, the reevaluation must be completed by the anniversary date of the eligibility determination. It's important to know that if something changes and you feel that your team needs more information about how your child is learning, you can actually have evaluations before that 3-year block is up, but you cannot have more than 1 per calendar year. The purpose is to determine eligibility, IEP programming, and again, it's required at least once every 3 years. So record review versus a comprehensive evaluation, you know, for a child that perhaps you've had lots of professionals in looking at things and you feel like you know what, we have tons of information about my kiddo. It doesn't feel like we need to do a new comprehensive evaluation this year. You can do something called a record review to determine eligibility without doing new testing. That is an option that you have.
Okay, a couple of points before we move on. I do see we have a couple of questions. We'll hold questions until the end, unless there's a question that is requesting clarification of a specific slide. Another thing I just wanted to point out is that this presentation covers primarily Part B, school-age children. So for children under Part C, those would be the infants and toddlers, the process is different all the way from eligibility to programming. And even for little ones in preschool under an IEP, there are some differences as well. In fact, the early childhood special education IEP does look different from kids from the ages 6 through 21. But again, we are trying to cover a lot in this presentation, so we chose not to cover those areas as well. But if you have any questions about those areas because your kids are in those age groups, certainly call us. Okay, so I'm continuing with the presentation. So if your child is found eligible after the evaluation process that Christine just went through, then the team will have to develop an individualized education program or an IEP. If a child is found not to be eligible for an IEP because the 3 gates that Christine also mentioned were not met, then the team should decide if the child qualifies for a Section 504 plan, or barring that, what supports can be provided for the child under an educational support team plan. Some schools do call the EST plan the MTSS. A couple of timelines here. When a child is found eligible, the IEP must be developed within 30 days. It must be reviewed and revised at least once a year. However, if parents have concerns about an IEP, they can ask for an IEP meeting and revise it more frequently than that. IEP team members. So an IEP team consists of required and optional members. The required members are the parent, the child, and the LEA. The LEA is the local educational agency, and that is the person that must be knowledgeable about special education and able to authorize and allocate resources. There are other required members: the special education teacher, the general educator, individuals who can interpret evaluations. Some members can wear more than one hat, but the 2 members who should not be the same person would be the special educator and the general educator. This slide shows the optional members on an IEP team. It's important to note that a family, if you look at the last bullet, can bring really anyone they want for support. It could be a relative, it could be a friend, it could be an advocate. But a family can always invite someone to that meeting to just support the family attending. Now we'll go through the different parts of the IEP. The IEP starts with the child's present levels of educational and functional performance. It should be up to date, it should be comprehensive, and all team members, including the parent, should be providing input. Where do these present levels come from? They come from the evaluations, they come from assessments, from schoolwork, from observations. The present levels of performance serve also as the basis for accommodations, modifications, and related services. The next section of the IEP are the child's goals and objectives. There are annual goals, which are based on the present levels of performance, and the short-term objectives make up pieces of the annual goal. Goals and objectives should be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. If you do not understand the wording of a goal or objective, you should always ask the teachers or evaluators concerned what those might mean. When goals and objectives are written, these should be taken into consideration. Standards, preferences, generalization. A well-written goal and objective needs to be descriptive and detailed. Short-term objectives should be specific as to when, where, and how. Here is an example of an annual goal. It details the task, the frequency, the manage, and the measurement. Here is an associated short-term objective. It details a step towards the goal. It is important to monitor the progress of a goal so it can be changed or modified when necessary. Progress can be measured through checklists, through communication logs, schoolwork results, observations, data. Goals must be reported to parents at least as often as other parents receive progress reports, and they must include the child's progress towards meeting the IEP goals. The services page specifies the detail of every service your child receives in order to make progress towards their goals and objectives. Read this page carefully. We often find that parents don't quite read that page, and there's a lot of information that you can get from the page. Related services are also part of that IEP, and related services help children with disabilities benefit from their special education by providing extra help and support in needed areas.
So here's a little more about related services. This is what they're supposed to do. So if you think of the term related services, they're related to the special education that your child is being given. So it's supporting that effort. It should help them advance towards their goal. It should help them be involved in the general ed curriculum, so being with their peers and perhaps accessing the same information that they're learning. Participate in extracurricular and non-academic activities, that's important as well, and be educated with children with and without disabilities. So here's a little listing of what are considered related services, and you can see there's quite a few things on there, including transportation, social work, psychological. So there are things that I know families aren't always aware. Particularly transportation, I think often families don't know that that is something that could be included in the IEP as a related service if your child needs that. Orientation and mobility, recreation, including therapeutic recreation, those are all parts of what keeps your child healthy and happy. Even more, so counseling services, school health services, and as we talked about earlier in the evaluation section, assistive technology and training. So least restrictive environment is a term that we hear talked about a lot. I'm not sure that all families really understand what that means, but it's an important concept within special education. So least restrictive environment really means that special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children with disabilities from the general ed environment should only occur if the nature or severity of the child's disability is such that in general ed classes, with the use of supplemental aids and services, cannot be achieved satisfactorily. You could tell I was reading that, but it's a complicated concept. And the least restrictive environment, the important thing to know is it's different for each child. For some children, it may be in the general ed classroom with their peers. For other children, it might look different. But if exclusion from general education is needed for your child in order to be able to access their education, that has to be justified in writing in the IEP. That's an important part to know. Placement is the last thing that's discussed when you're developing the IEP. All of those other pieces that Karen talked about feed into the decision as far as where should this happen. So here are all the things we're going to do. Here are the goals that we're working on. Where's the best place for this to happen? It should be based on your child's individual needs and not on the disability category. So you never want to hear, oh, all the kids with autism are down in room 3. And I'm sure you don't hear that, but that's just an example of that would not be appropriate. So part of educational placement, as we talked about, the child will not participate, if your child is not going to participate in regular class and extracurricular and non-academic activities with children who do not have disabilities, that needs to be justified. Here's an important piece, and we do actually get quite a few questions about this. If you're going to place your child in a private school, so if you make that decision as a family that, you know what, we've decided we like the school down the road, we understand it's a private school, and you have a child in special education, it's important to know that you are waiving your child's right to special education. That is your right to do that, and many families do make that decision, but sometimes they make it without understanding that that's what's happening. You can still request an individual service plan from the district in which the private school is located, but any sort of assistance that you're given, typically it's much less than you would receive under special ed in the public school, and it's at the discretion of the district, so it's really dependent on funding and other areas. So let's talk a little bit about assessments. Assessments, you want to make sure your child has appropriate accommodations. So like we used to do the kneecaps, now we're doing the Smarter Balanced, which is part of the Common Core. Those state, you know, I think it's in grade 3, 11, and I don't know what else. So you want to make sure that there's a description. So if your child has a print disability and they're being tested in a particular area that isn't specifically about reading, they might be able to get a text reader or extra time on the test. What kind of accommodations might they need? So accommodation versus modification. An accommodation does not change the content of what's being taught, but provides support to access the general ed curriculum. So it's the same thing that everyone else is learning, but you might learn it in a little bit of a different way. A modification changes the general ed curriculum based on the child's needs. So the actual curriculum itself is different. So an accommodation for a test, here's an example. It allows the child to complete the same assignment or test as other students, but with change in timing. So maybe they get more time. Formatting, maybe they have a large print version. Setting, maybe it's in a quiet room. Scheduling, maybe it's at the first thing in the morning. Response and or presentation. And it does not alter any significant way what the test or assignment measures. So they're still measuring what all the other kids are doing too. So here's some examples of accommodations: assistive technology, being able to take a test orally, using a checklist, etc. Here's a little bit about modification. So a modification on a test would actually have an adjustment to an assignment or a test that changes the standard or what the test or assignment is supposed to measure. So you're actually measuring something a little bit different than all the kids in regular education. Here are some examples of modifications. Your homework might be a little bit different, working towards testing those things that are a little bit different than the other kids. Small group instruction, peer tutoring, alternate formats, changes to the physical setting, etc. So extended school year, this is another piece that should be included in the IEP. Extended school year includes special education and related services beyond the regular school day or year. So sometimes people talk about ESY and they only think about summer services. That is one component of it, but if your child needed a longer school day or some time in the morning or right after school, those are also considered extended school year services and should be written into the IEP. If the IEP team determines if necessary for a free appropriate public education in accordance with the IEP. And it's, again, provided at no cost to parents. So ESY, this is how it's determined. If your child needs extended opportunity to reach the goals, so if without ESY they're not going to reach their goals on time, that's one reason you could ask for ESY. Regression and recoupment time. So, for example, that long summer break, if they're going to lose a lot of what they learned in the school year and it's going to take them longer than the average student to recoup that learning, that would be a reason for ESY. And also to work on those transition goals. So as your child turns 16, and we'll talk about that shortly, the transition related goals could be included in extended school year services. Consent to bill Medicaid. This is part of most IEPs. You have to consent in order for the school to bill Medicaid. There's actually a signature you have to provide on the IEP. Once you give consent, they'll need a written statement. You would need to give the school a written statement in order to revoke it. However, it's important to know that if for some reason you didn't feel comfortable doing that, that doesn't mean that your child's services would change, because services are supposed to be provided free to families regardless. Transition plan must be included in the first IEP in effect when the student is 16 or younger, if determined appropriate by the IEP team, and updated during the annual IEP meetings for the remainder of the time when the student is enrolled in school with an IEP. So if your child is going to turn 16 in December, really during that year of school, that's when the transition plan should be included in the IEP. That doesn't mean you can't start talking about it sooner than that, but that's when it's required.
Okay, our transition toolkit. We maintain a comprehensive transition toolkit on the VFN website. It contains a wealth of information for professionals, families, and youth on transition resources. Check it out. A transition plan, and this is part of the IEP. So it's almost like an IEP within an IEP based on transition goals. So it must contain goals related to education or training and employment, independent living if appropriate for the youth. A transition plan should be student-centered and well supported. Transition plans should also contain linkages to other outside post-secondary services. And this slide shows a few examples of these outside services.
So we do see there are some questions coming in, and just a reminder, we will answer those at the end of the presentation.
Parental rights transfer to a youth at the age of 18, unless the youth is to be under guardianship. Just a couple of words about the multi-year plan. Right now, the multi-year or the alternative credit accrual plan is still in effect, but it will be replaced by proficiency-based graduation requirements and personalized learning plans. The PBGRs and PLPs will be required of all students with or without disabilities. But it is an individual plan for students who need an alternative way to achieve graduation requirements. When your child graduates from high school with a regular diploma or ages out of special education, IDEA requires the school to provide a summary of academic achievement and functional performance. The summary of performance should include recommendations about ways to meet the post-secondary goals. Procedural safeguards. So we've gone basically over all the different pieces of the IEP, and we're just sort of moving to a couple of other pieces of information. So procedural safeguards, if you recall, are the parents' rights. And schools are required to give families a paper copy of the procedural safeguards at least once a year, but also upon these specific events that are on the slide. Part of procedural safeguards include dispute resolutions, and there are 3 methods for resolving disputes. And this would be when a parent and a school are in disagreement over a child's evaluation or programming. Mediation is free and voluntary. It is often very helpful in settling disagreements. The administrative complaint is investigated by the Vermont Agency of Education, and corrective actions can result. In a due process hearing, a parent has the right to an impartial hearing officer and to present evidence and witnesses. There are strict timelines to this process, and the school will retain an attorney. It is difficult for a parent to take on due process without also retaining an attorney. And just a quick couple of slides about discipline. Discipline procedures for children with disabilities are administered differently for children without disabilities. This area too is fairly complicated, and we're just putting a couple of slides on it to let you know that there are special rules around discipline. But again, if you have any more detailed questions about those, to call us, and we also do have a fact sheet. Manifestation determination is a process that is held to decide on the course of action after a child with a disability violates a rule of conduct. So just to wrap up, we hope that you learn a little more about the special education process so that you can more fully participate as an equal member on the IEP team. As we mentioned earlier, we are all family support consultants here at the Vermont Family Network. And when you call us, this is how we can help. These are some areas of information that we have. Some resources. Well, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I see we have a couple of questions. And we have a few minutes. So for the first question, that's an easy one. Yes, a copy of the PowerPoint and this presentation will be made available. We will be archiving the webinar and the accompanying presentation, along with all of our webinars, on our VFN YouTube channel.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at the question. So here's a question. To what extent are services available if a child is homeschooled? So if you remember, we talked a little bit about privately placed children. So if a parent decides to place their child in a private school, the same circumstances apply for homeschooling children. So if you decide to homeschool your child, you waive your right to special education services. But again, you can approach your school district and ask for a service plan to be put in place. We know that it's not going to be most likely at the same extent that you would get services under an IEP. However, you might be able to get something to help support your child while you homeschool them. I hope that answers your question. Looks like we have another question.
Okay, so this question reads, I was under the impression that transition planning needed to be included in an IEP at age 14. Has that changed? It is, yes, it has changed. That used to be, we used to start that transition process at the age of 14, and it has changed to 16. The IDEA is actually up for comment at this time, and if you are interested, you can give us a call, because parents, anyone can provide input at the federal level for changes that could be made in the regulations, not the actual IDEA, the regulations. And one recommendation that we do feel strongly about at VFN is to move that transition process back down to 14. As we mentioned in this webinar, you can start the process at 14. You can even start the process at 12, but the regulation requires that this start at the age of 16.
So we have a couple more questions here. Let's see. Here's one. What can I do if my child isn't making sufficient progress with their goals and objectives? So that's a really good question. There's a few different ways you could approach that. The first thing is, it's good that you're able to measure that. Sometimes it's unclear to families and providers, if they're not looking again, whether or not the child is making progress. So the fact that you know your child isn't is good, because it means that you have some data to show that they're not making progress. In this case, it would probably be best to request an IEP meeting to talk about the goals and talk about the services that are in place, because it may mean that you need to have more service or a different type of service to support your child in reaching their goals on time. Remember, we also talked about extended school year services, so that might be another option if you need more time for your child to reach their goal. Couple more questions here.
The school has told me that before my son graduates, we should replace his IEP with a 504 plan, since there are no IEPs in college. What should I do? Well, it is true that there are no IEPs in college. Colleges do have to provide reasonable accommodations for youth with disabilities. So while a written 504 plan or IEP could be useful to the college for planning purposes, a college will develop its own accommodations, plan of accommodations, and what a family or what that youth should try to bring with them when they go to college would be an updated evaluation that clearly shows what his or her disability might be and what types of accommodations are needed.
Okay, here's another one. What resources does VFN have for transition age youth? Wow, you asked the right question. So we have the toolkit that's on our website that Karen talked about briefly, and I would encourage you to access that. There is a ton of information in there. We have 80 plus webinars around a whole variety of topics, but a lot of them are about transition. And please feel free to always to call us. We're here to help you as you navigate what we know is a very complicated system. So please feel free to give us a call. Let's see, I think we have time for like 2 more questions. Let's see. I am a parent. When can I request an IEP meeting? Okay, that's a good one. I think a lot of times families are under the impression that they can have one IEP meeting a year, kind of that annual review meeting. And it's true that that is required. So at a minimum, you should be having one per year. But it's important to know that you have a right to request an IEP meeting whenever you think the team needs to meet and talk about the services in the IEP or supports, or if you have a concern about behavior, any kind of concern that could be addressed through the services and supports in the IEP, you can go ahead and make a request for an IEP meeting. Some families go so far as to schedule regular IEP meetings. They might have them quarterly whenever the progress comes out. That's a really good time to meet with your team.
Okay, and I think we'll do one more question. I'm a parent and want VFN's help. What does it cost? Our help to parents are provided free to families. We are funded under federal grants and some state grants. So calling us, sitting down with us to go over evaluations, IEPs, that does not cost a parent anything. We do have our workshops, our webinars are provided for free. Our conference does have a fee. We do have an annual conference. It happens every year in April next year. In fact, it's happening on April 13th at the Sheraton.
3rd.
Okay.
Sorry.
The 3rd. It's a long ways away.
It's a long ways away.
There's a fee associated with that conference, but we do try to have scholarships available so that the conference fee is not a barrier for any family who would like to attend.
You see one comment, great content and easy to follow. Thank you. Hey, thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. I'm glad you found it helpful.
Well, and to close up, just a reminder to check out our VFN website at vermontfamilynetwork.org. We have helpful resources, information about upcoming webinars and other workshops, as well as events that we think families will be interested in. This webinar will be archived along with all of our other webinars. They will be available on our VFN YouTube channel, which you can access going through our VFN website. And just a reminder, our number here is 1-800-800-4005. If you have any questions about your child's disability and school, please call us. Have a great day.
Bye.